Hello and welcome to AI in Canada, From Hype to Impact, a series that explores how Canadian industries are transitioning from AI hype to achieving tangible business outcomes. I'm Derek Marinos. Today, we're exploring the ethical and responsible use of AI with our distinguished guest, Dr. Diane Gutiw, Vice President and Global AI Research Lead at CGI and newly appointed co-chair of Canada's AI Advisory Council. Diane, congratulations and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Derek, and it's great to join you and have this conversation.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be with you. We'll be talking about a lot of great topics today, including Canada's AI landscape, ethical challenges, and of course, practical strategies for responsible implementation. Let's begin by looking at today's AI environment. Diane, you've been traveling extensively, contributing internationally to AI development. Based on your experience, what key trends have stood out, and how does Canada fit into this global landscape?
Great question, Derek. I think the biggest thing that we're all watching is just this rapid evolution of the technology capabilities, and the offerings that are continuously coming out as generative AI, large language models, and now agentic AI are really taking off. A lot of us are when we look at it through the lens of responsible AI, is how do we keep the compliance guidelines and responsible use in sync with the technology evolution? So for Canada, we've always taken a lens of we really want to foster innovation. We want to use this as a tool in our toolbox to be able to solve some really big problems, and yet need to do it with ethical guardrails. And by focusing on, the principles, that really does help set that.
How would you describe Canada's AI State of the Union? We were talking about ethics, and if you could go back to that question and bring me some insights on where Canada stands today.
Right. So as you know, Canada put out a code of conduct that was optional code of conduct for organizations to sign, and quite a few have signed that to commit to ethical AI. As a country, I think the stance that Canada has taken, and we've seen it through policy, through Health Canada and others, and provincially, is that we want to foster innovation, but do it in a way that is safe, that to apply guardrails for responsible use of AI and be able to make sure that we're all working towards AI as a tool to foster good. And we're going to see that moving forward, as well as how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, and striking a balance, and as most people know, and as you know, our organization here at CGI is all about balance. It's one of the things that we talk about a lot. Can you articulate CGI's position on this?
Right. Well, CGI has been working with AI, machine learning, advanced analytics for decades in different industries, from predictive models to decision support across all different industries. And we've always taken a stance of a principles-based approach. You see that across a lot of the vendor partners we work with as well. Is it's impossible to nail down what's the risk of a tool without knowing what you're using it for. But when you focus on the principles, and the principles come from research ethics, privacy, security, transparency, explainability, reliability, these principles really help guide you in determining, first of all, is this a use case that's safe to use AI on? How are we going to curate the data? How do we protect privacy in developing these models? So CGI has a framework that we're able to address what the purpose is, what the data is, what the model is, and then how we're going to implement that. And that principles-based approach, as I say, is echoed from legislation and compliance guidelines globally. And CGI is really working to have one approach, one standard across the organization globally that exceeds the most stringent compliance guidelines, so that we're not having to replicate this over and over again.
No, and that makes a lot of sense, that kind of uniformity. What unique challenges and opportunities do Canadian industries face when moving from AI hype, so to speak, to actual impact?
I think the biggest impact right now and the biggest challenge that we're all having is staying ahead of the latest, what's coming out. We all started getting our hands on generative AI, whether it's in our personal use on our phones. We saw it integrated into a lot of our technology solutions, from the co-pilots and um, all of these different tools are coming at organizations so quickly. And now, as we move into a world of agentic AI, where you have collaborative agents working together, it's just staying ahead of the latest curve. That's a real challenge, as well as staying ahead of the latest compliance guidelines, whether it's at a provincial level, at the federal level, or within different organizations. How does this technology fit your policy guidelines? So it's a rapid world of change that we're all trying to stay ahead of.
Yeah, and obviously with a lot of change and trying to stay ahead of the curve, I mean, a lot of organizations are really trying to leverage these opportunities really to overcome implementation hurdles, especially when we're talking about maybe public and private sector. How can organizations really, at least in both sectors, really leverage that?
Well, I think the key is to not start with the technology, to start
Right.
with what is it that you're trying to solve? What is the problem? What is the question you're trying to answer? And when you look at it that way, it's much easier then to say, okay, this is the right tool. And it cuts through a lot of the noise of what's coming out so quickly. And a lot of the time when we start with what's the problem you're trying to solve, it's often not even an AI problem. It may be a data integration problem or a gathering insights from information problem. So
Mm.
if we start with what is it we're trying to solve? What is your strategic direction? What is the question you're trying to answer, from resource capacity to solving issues quicker, for moving through tickets, or being able to get content out quicker? That really is where it helps guide then what is the framework and how do we do this? And rather than just trying to throw AI at everything.
And considering cultural norms and policy factors, how might these evolve or change as AI technologies continue to advance?
Yeah, it's hard to predict that completely, but I do know I've been working with part of the group that's building out the EU AI Act Code of Conduct, and future proofing is something that we're all trying to stay ahead of. How do we set policy guidelines now that will lead us into the future? And again, I think it comes back to these principles. When you focus on principles, when you look at the concepts of AI governance, making decisions as organizations or as a nation or as a province, public sector, private sector, governing both the use case of what you're going to use it for and the technologies that fit within your organizational compliance guidelines or within the country is going to be really critical. I think AI literacy is critical as another pillar, standing up
Mm.
and making sure that we're discerning users of technology moving forward and we're able to use it in a responsible way, as well as use it in an effective way so that we're getting the value out of the tools. And then lastly, in trying to future proof, again, look at what it is you need rather than what is out there. Do I really need something that does this, or is there a set of tools that are going to be able to answer that question?
Yeah, I love the term future proof. And you mentioned guardrails as well, because I'm interested in that as well. What guardrails should organizations adopt to mitigate risks?
Well, I think the ones that we've all been watching and are know really well are privacy and security for sure. Both information coming to us, making sure that we're not taking anything that's copyright, anything that was not meant to be shared, as well as making sure any information we're sharing with these models is protected. Organizations, particularly when you're dealing with sensitive information or personal information, proprietary information, need to be sure that the infrastructure and the models that they're using are protected and nothing is going outside of their own scope. I think reliability is one. Adopt these for business decisions, and I see a question from the audience asking, "Can AI guide business and business decisions?" With that,
Yeah.
reliability is absolutely critical, and transparency. Where did this information come from? Is really critical. And all of those principles that, again, we've used in research for years: explainability, repeatability, making sure we don't have any unintended negative consequence from the tool or the decision that we're making. When you bring those things into focus and focus on that business problem, it makes it much easier. But Derek, let's address that question on how can businesses use this for decision making.
Yeah, I'd like to get into that as well, and like to thank everybody who's still with us. We've got people on the line, which is really great, and we have a question from Rahil, and I was just going to get to it after your answer. I think it's appropriate. It's the perfect spot. Do you think AI can guide business or business decisions? I mean,
I think,
a good question.
Again, it depends on what that decision is. You've heard me before use the analogy of information like water. You can turn on your drinking water, you turn on your tap and know that your drinking water is safe, or know when it's not safe, because we have regulation, we have standards, and we have communication on from the source through to the use of water. We need to have something similar for data and information if we're going to use it for critical or life critical decision making. So I do think we're going to get there. We're seeing these models increase in quality with new releases coming out. And then agentic AI has been a really great solution in increasing the quality. And what that means is you have one agent that might be going and gathering the information and generating the answers to questions, but you can have a second independent agent, which is fact checking. It's making sure that that information came from the correct source of truth, that the information was compiled correctly. And, the biggest challenge that I think we've seen in generative AI, or one of the bigger ones, is it can collect 3 or 4 correct facts, but it doesn't always connect the dots correctly in giving you your response. Again, by using agentic AI, you can check that and make sure that the quality of the answer has been increased. And that's where I think we're really going to see that investment in getting the answers and the information closer to business. There's been a lot of groundbreaking in transparency, giving us the source. But if you have to go in and click every link and check the source is correct every time, the value of the tool isn't there. It's going to just be equally as time consuming. So if we have another agent that's checking that for us and doing the fact checking, that really is going to help get closer to getting really accurate information for decision making.
That's very interesting, and it's a really nice segue, I think, to our next segment. And let's discuss core ethical issues in AI, like bias, transparency, privacy, and accountability. From your point of view, what are the most pressing ethical concerns organizations must address as they implement AI solutions?
Yeah, I think, well, reliability, obviously. You want to make sure if you're using information to answer a business question. I think privacy and security are pretty key. When you're bringing in these technologies, it's really easy to grab one of those very open public models and use it to get answers to questions. But people need to understand that those are not always secured, and the information you're sharing may go back to the tool to be able to retrain the tool or you also need to think of where that information is being stored. If you're giving a prompt, where is it being stored? There's a lot of solutions that our partner vendors are putting out there that are secure. There are options for private browsers that are secure. So understanding the model and what the infrastructure is for that model, and implementing something with the level of security and privacy protection, and then also be discerning in what you share. Putting PII on any forum is something that we all know that is not a good idea. We need to think of these tools when not protected as public forums.
Let's look at some interesting use cases now. And would you talk about BC Cancer's AI journey as a relevant Canadian example?
Yeah, I think that is a really good example, Derek. The BC Cancer and a number of health authorities across British Columbia adopted the concept of using digital assistants to get information to citizens and patients. It was early machine learning, and it did allow let's go back to the problem that they were trying to solve, was how do we have people asking questions that can be answered by websites and have static answers to questions. How can we get those people to get off of the lines where they're calling, say, nurses or the 811 nurses line? And we stood that up during COVID as well, to have an agent provide that source of information across a dynamic set of web pages and policies and guidelines. So that was the initial use case. And as people began to use it, it did relieve a lot of the nurses that were answering the questions that really could be used for more clinical questions. Rather than where do I park my car? Can my brother come to my appointment with me? They were able now to answer the questions that were more clinical. By using these tools, you can use the types of questions people are asking to be able to inform you how you grow it. The type of questions people are asking are as important as giving them the answers, because you start to see what is it people are trying to find out. And the next stage, specific to the BC Cancer one, is they added the option to have a live handoff to a nurse. So if you're having a conversation with the agent, they then now can say, no, I actually would like to talk to a nurse about my problem, so that they can pair that off. And that's the sort of solution and the evolution of these solutions we're going to see. How can we better support citizens to be able to extend their capabilities across a smaller number of resources with a larger number of questions coming in?
Thank you. And questions are really important. And of course, we do have people listening to us, and we do appreciate your time and hanging around with us. If you have a question for Diane, please do give us some time and drop it in. We'd love to get Diane's perspective to help you out. And your response is really interesting in terms of, that's a great Canadian example, but globally we do have other examples to talk about as well. If there's one, what would you really focus on?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting that I see right now is the concept of digital triplet. And it sounds like a big technical thing, but really that concept is adding a layer of generative AI over your existing data and information investments. And what that's able to do that, say, a digital twin or a dashboard was not able to do, is you're able to use natural language to have a conversation with your data. You can interrogate your data to ask, what does this mean? What's my next best option? Or what will happen in the future if I don't change this? And it allows you to go a lot further and have an expert advisor that's able to see that. We really see this as next generation dashboards, rather than just looking at all of the charts. And even if it's interactive, drilling down to the answer to a question, you can phone that and have a conversation with your data and say, okay, I need to know right now what's the number of FTEs I have in the organization, and of those, how many are contractors, something like that is really getting that information. The whole evolution of analytics and AI, Derek, has been focused on getting information closer to the people that need the answers to the questions. And this generative AI, the ability to use natural language by voice or by text, is really taking us that next level.
Some important lessons have been learned here as well, especially from these examples too.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Trustworthiness, I'd say that's the number one reason why organizations have not yet moved a lot of these pilots into production, making sure that you're curating your information, that you're fine-tuning these models with. Once you take a model and use it for its capabilities, it's not looking at the whole internet for its answers anymore. It's looking at your own organizational data and documents. You want to make sure you've still curated that. So data governance becomes critical in making sure you're looking to the right information as that source of truth. But trustworthiness, transparency, to me, are the two that help make sure that you've got that security, privacy, source of truth as you're beginning to use this to be able to answer questions.
How can organizations balance the drive? It's an important one for innovation with the need to implement really robust ethical safeguards.
I think starting small and scaling would be my best advice. Don't try to do everything in one go. Start with a use case, get comfortable with how the tool works and how reliable the information is, and extend from that use case. That's what we're seeing the early adopters have done, rather than take a tool and put it on a really tough clinical problem, maybe start with something that's aggregate data, like on top of a dashboard, and start to really get familiar with how the tool works, how you can trust it. Prompt engineering, if there was one piece of training that I would suggest users of AI could jump on, would be prompt engineering. How do I ask it the right question to get the answer that I want?
We got a question from Tiffany, Diane. She's looking for you to provide some examples of how agentic AI is being used in healthcare.
Yeah, agentic AI is still very new. Yeah, it's a new technology. Where we're starting to see it, I'd say the number one use case is a quality agent, a fact-checking agent. And we've seen that built in over the last year to try to increase that level of quality and fact-checking. So to me, that's the number one use. Digital triplets, we're starting to see that more and more in looking over top of the dashboards. So having it one agent that can retrieve data, a second agent that can retrieve documents, a third agent that can merge that information, generate a response, maybe an agent that can generate images, breaking up that problem into multiple collaborative agents that are familiar in the context and familiar in the data and are listening and have the latest information available to them to be able to retrieve that. That's where we're starting to see it. But I do see the ability to start using this for clinical information. If we think of diagnostic imaging, for example, where right now we can get an answer to a question, use AI to be able to detect early brain bleeds or to be able to decrease the age of screening for cancers. Right now, you'll just get, you have this millimeter bleed in this hemisphere. And it's up to a clinician then to determine, okay, what's my next best action? Or in oncology, to be able to determine, here's the diagnoses and here's the clinical history. And it's up to a clinician to put that together. If you add this agent model, this agentic model, you then could ask the question, well, based on this patient, what's a non-surgical intervention? Or what clinical trial might be available for a patient that has this genomic makeup, this clinical history, and this diagnoses or complex diagnoses, and really personalize the answers to the question. That's where I see it going. I had the privilege of being at HIMSS last week and saw a lot of these agentic solutions. Agentic AI in healthcare was definitely the theme of HIMSS in Las Vegas. But I don't see a lot of those really deep in the clinical side. A lot of them, again, are starting in the more safe areas and building out. And I think maybe, by the time we finish this podcast, that may have changed. And that's how rapidly technology is evolving.
It's so true. But it's interesting to see how it's evolving and the potential for it to evolve, to have another voice in the room almost with another opinion and perhaps another path forward, and one that, we're seeing the breakthroughs from a diagnostic perspective. And now, we're seeing the next evolution. I think that's really interesting. Tiffany, thank you for the question. Much appreciated. I'd like to move on now to, I think, a really fun part of the program. And I know the regulatory stuff is fun, but I know everybody's interested in practical strategies for responsible AI as well. And I think you've got a lot to offer there, Diane. Let's cover some actionable strategies and best practices for responsible AI use. Which practices are most essential for long-term success?
I think one, AI governance, setting up a governance model where you can make decisions clearly, having the decisions driven from the top, but addressing the needs of whatever the problem is you're trying to solve, from a contact center streamlining through to something clinical, being able to determine which technologies make sense for your organizations, which ones are safe to use. So AI governance. The next would be AI literacy. I stand by, I don't think AI is going to replace us in our jobs, but I think people that know how to work with AI are what are going to be the next generation of workforce. And getting organizations familiar with the terms of use, responsible use is really critical, and how to ask the right questions so you're getting value. The third would be risk. Making sure that at each stage of selecting an AI model, selecting your use case, actually flip that around, selecting your use case, then selecting the data, selecting the model, and implementing, that you're addressing risk at each phase and you're mitigating risk. And determining, and the EU AI Act is very focused on levels of risk. What is an unacceptable level of risk versus what is a level of risk that I can mitigate so that I get the value? And that would be the last one. Make sure right at the use case level, you identify what's the benefit you intend to get from this implementation of AI. Is it speeding up the time to solving tickets on a contact center? Is it providing more information to clinicians? Is it for doing the documentation and the tasks that are taking a lot of time away from practical work? And then measure, did I get the value from this solution, or what do I need to adjust to make sure I'm getting that value?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And the risk reward is really important. And again, it comes down to, I think, some of the fundamentals you always talk about. What problem are we trying to solve? How do we get back to basics and move forward from there? And speaking of basics, and I think when we look at a lot of the landscape and a lot of, I think, where businesses are, why are transparency and human oversight critical in maintaining AI accountability?
Yeah, I think transparency, well, you hear the term human in the loop.
That's right.
I think you need to extend that to human on the loop, which means not every AI answer to every question can be curated by a human, but you need to monitor. You need to make sure the answers are correct. You need to make sure that the tool is still relevant and that people are getting the information they need. So you're extending what the capabilities are in the correct way. So having human on the loop is as critical as having a human in the loop. For us at CGI, we do not automate decision making for these critical decisions. We always want to provide an expert advisor. For example, our head AI, which is used to detect early brain bleeds, the radiologist does the first read of the film, and then they get the additional information and advice from the AI advisor on what they may have missed. And it's up to the human then to use that as additional information in a diagnosis and treatment plan.
What measures can help organizations build stakeholder trust while still achieving business outcomes?
Yeah, it comes back to start small, get familiar with the tools, pick a tool that fits your infrastructure, pick a tool that you have checked that meets your compliance guidelines, whether it's data residency, whether it's how the model is protected, and then train your staff on how to use it. One of the things at CGI that we've seen is really valuable is picking a safe solution, but having a terms of use accompanying it, because the technology is evolving so quickly. A new feature may come in, in the time from when we've evaluated a technology to when it's used. And the best safety for that is to have that accompanying security privacy review, and then also a terms of use for our users to make sure acceptable use is understood. No different than the internet. There's only so much you can do to stop people doing things or looking at things or going to sites that may not be safe. But when you add an acceptable use of technology protocol to that, that's really how we protected that. And I think we need to do the same thing with our AI, make sure that the users in organizations are understanding and are trained on what an acceptable use is.
Yeah, and let's take a closer look at the evolving regulatory landscape and emerging trends in AI and ethical AI, especially. What role do you think industry collaboration with regulators will play in shaping future regulations?
I think it's already playing a role. We're seeing in the US and Canada and in Europe, there's a lot of collaboration with the big technology vendor suppliers and assurances that they are also following best practice protocols in responsible AI. So I think that collaboration is really key. In Canada, making sure we understand what industry needs and that we're addressing the needs as well as the security protocols, so that again, fostering innovation within guardrails, so that this is the path that you can take to be able to do that innovation and not be too restrictive, but make sure that we're protecting what matters most while providing solutions that help increase and foster that.
Yeah. What future trends should organizations keep an eye on to stay ahead in ethical AI implementation?
Future trends. Well, it's hard. I mean, what future trends were last week are already here today. Agentic AI is definitely the hot topic, and look for where agentic AI can actually support. You'll see autonomous collaborative agents. Autonomous is important in that these agents to be useful are not just like traditional AI or intelligent automation are not just pointed at take this data from here and move it to there. They're able to actually do more, but make sure that there's a framework, that there's again guardrails. I hate keeping using that word, but make sure that you have contained what these agents are able to do and that you're monitoring and have oversight to make sure that they're working in a way that you intend, but give them the ability to solve the problem for you.
No, that's interesting. And again, we're back to the same solve the problem. You've talked a lot about solve the problem. And I think from a foundational perspective, that is very much the core of it. People see AI as sometimes as a panacea and a way to fix anything and everything. But we've been trying to solve problems for a long time. We've got a question from audience, and I'd love to get this one to your attention, Diane, from Olivier. Thank you for the question. What is the position of CGI about the AI Act in Europe?
Yeah, and we look at that actually in a couple of different ways. So CGI has signed the AI Act Pact, which means that we're committed to adhering to the AI Act. And with that, we've had the opportunity to sit in on a few workshops and engagements with the EU AI Commission. We also have been engaged as part of the plenary groups and the workshops for developing the code of conduct for general purpose AI developers. CGI is a downstream developer. We're an integrator. And as part of being able to provide input into the code of conduct has been really interesting. As a consultancy, though, that's one of our offerings under our business consulting group is to be able to look at compliance for our client organizations as they implement AI, having an offering that we can go through and say, yes, this is compliant, is some of what we've been building out with our team in the EU. The same way we do with different ISO standards, being able to help an organization do a pre-review of whether they're compliant and to make sure that what they're building out. So we've addressed that in a few different ways. And as I say, we really have strived to have a single standard for the organization. And we've been staying very close to the EU AI Act to help us guide internally what that standard is.
Very important, those standards. Another question from Francisco. More or less, when we talk about accountability with responsible AI, what role does the user actually have to play here?
Yeah, and the user can be a couple of different levels, right? So,
right.
And this is a great ethical debate, moral responsibility for AI errors, right? There's a first that the AI vendors need to do. You should be using a tool that has gone through rigorous testing before you use it. And then as an organization adopting a tool, make sure that you're validating and that it's first of all set up, that it's fine-tuned in a way that's answering questions correctly, and that the users have been trained in how to use it correctly and how to be discerning. We need to be discerning, no different than if I Google something, I'm looking at all the results before I decide which is the best result. Being able to ask the questions of these chat Gen AI solutions to get the best answer and to be discerning in the information it's giving. And then, as I said earlier, the terms of use. Make sure as an organization that's adopting these that you've set guidelines for terms of use, and that will help you future-proof how your staff are using the tools because you've already set that guideline before maybe new capabilities have rolled out. It's a real challenge because you've got these general purpose AI solutions. We've got generative AI AI for developer acceleration. They're getting integrated into everything from every tool, every work product tool that you could imagine. So it's a bit inevitable that these tools are coming out, as well as people have it on their phones and can look up answers to questions on your phone. So training with the concept that people could be using it for almost anything, and then refining to what's our organization's acceptable use is really going to help. So the accountability, I think that
Yeah,
there's accountability at multiple levels.
for sure. And of course, it's a really interesting question, like you mentioned, and you do have different definitions for users in there as well. But I'd like to thank Francisco and Olivier for their questions. Now, as we wrap up, Diane, what final recommendations do you have for organizations starting on their AI journey?
Yeah, right now we're right on the cusp of a massive resource capacity crunch, between 10 to 40%, depending on where you get your numbers, of people will be retiring in the next 10 years. So having a technology that helps upskill the next generation of our workforce, that helps give us personalized services and personalized clinical decisions is really going to be critical, as those retiring are the ones that are relying on others to be able to provide those services. So as it's inevitable, I think embracing innovation is important, but embrace innovation thoughtfully. Make sure that you're focused on what is the problem you're trying to solve, what is the right tool for our organization, and setting those guardrails as well, the terms of use for your users and being able to adopt.
Those are really strong fundamentals. And I think as a foundation for any business, it's always a place where you can put a solid foot on and begin to move forward. And that's sound advice. Thank you, Dr. Gutiw. I really appreciate your time for sharing your valuable insights today on the ethical and responsible use of AI. Your expertise truly highlights the path from hype to impact and tangible business outcomes as well. And for everyone listening, please, thank you for joining us. And don't forget to miss our next edition of AI in Canada, From Hype to Impact, on March 26th. We'll be taking a closer look at AI in Canada's manufacturing sector. Until then, special thanks to Diane, and I'm Derek Marinos. Thank you for joining us. Be well. Bye for now.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you, Diane.